Hello, this is Cindy Ingram, and welcome to Wrecked by Art. And on this podcast, we explore the moments where art meets our lives and leaves us changed in some way. And today's episode is about sharks, it's about fiction, it's about burnout, and it's about the kind of creative magic that only shows up when you're deep in the work. This one is a story about writing my book, Art is About Being Whole. It's one of my favorite stories about the magic of the creative process. But it is also about surrender. It's about the subconscious, and it's about trusting the process. So my book is actually kind of formatted similar to this podcast in that each chapter, which would be each episode of the podcast, has a work of art in it. And as I wrote the book, I started to feel like there was an external force at play. I mean, I call myself a witch now, but like writing my book made me really feel like a witch because I would write something and then something would happen in my life that mirrored exactly what I had just written. Or I would be unsure about something. Like, did this really happen the way I remember? I start second guessing myself. I start gaslighting myself. And then something would happen in my life to show me that no, that really happened. This is true. You're remembering correctly. It was like these synchronicities and moments of my life that just kept coming in waves at the same time as I'm writing about them. Because once you're deep in a creative project, your subconscious starts to gather material even when you're not actively working. Like when I was writing in the chapter about shame, I saw shame everywhere. I saw it in people. Someone I follow on Facebook was launching a program about shame. There were all these things about shame just showing up all over the place. And so it's like the same thing of like when you're buying a car and say you want like a Subaru, whatever. Now you're suddenly seeing that particular Subaru everywhere you go because your subconscious is like, hey, we're going to buy a Subaru. Let's keep a lookout. And like when I was shopping for a tree for my front yard, suddenly I started noticing all the trees. And when they were background noise before, now I'm noticing, oh, look at the different kind of leaves, look at the different colors, look at the different sizes, look how this one's taller and that one's wider. All the stuff I would notice that I wouldn't normally pay attention to. But because I was actively shopping for trees, this happened. So when I was writing my book, it was the same thing. So you start to notice synchronicities, you start to notice quotes, and you start to notice things in songs and images and conversations, and they start to feel like gifts from the universe. They start to feel like you are not the only one writing the book. Like you're doing it, but your subconscious is doing it, which is obviously still part of you. And then also there's this magical force that is also involved that is really hard to explain, but it is such a magical experience. The best writing I've seen about this magic is from Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, which is one of my favorite books. So I highly recommend that if you're interested in this topic. And another thing that happens too is that I believe that the right book or the right artwork finds you exactly when you need it and exactly when you're ready for it. And that's happened to me again and again. And I'm going to do a podcast episode about this book at a later date, but I just finished reading this book called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. My friend recommended that book to me years ago. She uses that kind of like a sacred text, like it's a really important book to her. And I kept trying to read it, but I couldn't seem to read it. And then for years, every now and then, I pick it up and I'm trying to read it. I'm like, no, I can't read it right now, until the moment that I suddenly could. And that was in June. And something dramatically life-changing happened to me while reading this book. So that's a spoiler alert for a future episode that I'm not quite ready to talk about yet on the podcast, but I will. But something really big happened to me when reading that book. So there's a magic in that too, that if there's something in your life that you're needing insight on, the right movie, the right book, the right song will come and it'll hit you and it'll be exactly what you need to hear. And it is so wonderful and so magical. And another thing is like we can spend so much of our time overthinking and we can spend so much of our time over analyzing everything that we do. And, that's why when we go to therapy, it's good to get another person to bounce off of. You get another person to talk. It's good to talk in like group coaching programs, which I'm going to have one coming up soon. Spoiler alert. So keep an eye out for that. And it also happens with art, that the art is providing you something external, something outside of yourself that you can interpret, that you can look at, that you can find yourself in, and that you can feel. Like that takes you out of your mind and into your body. And that is what art does. And that's what happened in that book, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. It wasn't a moment of thinking. It was a moment of like full body experience, knowing of something. So it's just a magical process that happens both as like the consumer of the art, the reader, the viewer, whatever it is, the audience member or the whatever. It happens that way, but it also happens in the creative process as the artist, as the author, as the writer, as the poet, as the whatever. So it's really exciting. It's like even a chef, they'll be in a grocery store. Top Chef is one of my favorite shows. And it's like sometimes they won't know what they want until they find the right ingredient. And they're like, oh, this is what I want to do. We need something external to ourselves to be able to process the thing that's internal. So it's pretty exciting. And I love it. And I'll talk about it till the day I die because it is the best topic ever. It's the creative process. Okay, I'm going to tell you the story. So I'm writing my book and I get to one of the last chapters in part 1. And I mostly have the book, I have the book outlined. I have most of the artworks picked for each chapter. And, I have the artwork and what I'm going to write about. But this one chapter, I couldn't figure out what artwork to use. And usually I would start with the artwork and the artwork would kind of lead me to tell the story. But this time I had the story, but not the artwork. And that was really hard for me because starting with the art is what I usually do. I wrote the story part and the chapter was about burnout. And I told you in the last episode about how I had a huge burnout. And so I'm kind of trying to write about my burnout, wrote the story, but like kept trying to fit artworks with it. But like it wasn't just, nothing felt right. There wasn't that click. There wasn't that hell yes, And I wasn't going to just put something in there just because I had to. It had to be the right thing. So I wrote the rest of the chapter. I worked on other parts of the book and I had to trust that something would come. And so I let it rest, just like waiting in that fog, just like in the Dorothea Tanning's painting from last week. It was just a moment of not knowing. And sometimes the only thing you have to do is just stay with it and wait for something to emerge, because chances are whatever you're waiting for in the process is just still simmering. It's just still percolating. You're still working on it. Your subconscious is still churning on it. Your dreams. You don't know how many times I woke up in the process of writing this book at 3 a.m. like with such clarity about something, because that subconscious processing that happened, I would wake up and I'd be like, yes, I know, I got the answer. And then I would get up and start writing because I was like, I've got to get this down, So I was in that place of not knowing. I was in that place of, I don't know what to do for this chapter. And I also at the same time was reading a book. So I'm usually always reading a book. Now I'm reading like multiple books. I've changed the way I've read since I wrote my book, which is really weird. But anyway, I read a lot of fiction. And most of the fiction books that I read during the process of writing my book actually ended up in the book in some capacity. Maybe it was like the way they did the punctuation, or there was like a really beautiful bit of writing that like the way it was lyrical. And I was like, oh, I love that. And so I'd kind of like adopt that into something. like Maggie Smith's book, You Could Make This Place Beautiful, came out while I was writing the book. And she, at the end of it, had a poem that had lines from all of the chapters of her book, and it made a poem. And I was like, that is the most brilliant thing I've ever seen. So I did that. Of course, I cited her for the idea, although it's not something she invented either. But anyway, all the books that I read, that maybe I used a quote from the book, or it was a bit of writing, even in the acknowledgments, I thank all the authors of the books that I read while I was writing, because they were so important to me. And that's one of the most important things that, like, as an artist, as a writer, if you're an artist, you need to be looking at art. If you're a writer, you need to be reading. If you're a poet, you need to be reading poetry. Like, a lot of artists will think, oh, I don't want anybody influencing me. But that's how art is. That's how creativity is. It's making connections. It's riffing off of other things. It's iterating. It's being inspired by, like, it's not creating something new. It's something different, right? Okay. So anyway, I was reading Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt, which is an absolutely delightful book. Like, I 100% recommend you read it. It is so beautiful. It's about this woman who had lost a child, and she's older, and she volunteers at a aquarium where there's this like super smart octopuses. Well, all octopuses are smart, but it's about kind of the relationship between her and this octopus. It is so wonderful. But I was reading this book, and this character is experiencing a lot of grief, right? So she has a lot of feelings that she's working on. And there was a line where she was looking in the tank at the shark and said something about how sharks have to keep moving in order to breathe, which is a fact I did not know, which I learned later is actually true for not all species of sharks, but a lot of them can't breathe if they're not moving. But the line that got me is, she understands what it means to never be able to stop moving, lest you find yourself unable to breathe. And when I read that line, I mean, it just stopped. Like, it's like time stopped. It was like, oh, when you see something in art where you're just like, me too. I know what that feels like. I have lived that. That is me. That is a line so powerful that it just stopped me. And I was like, that is going in my book, that line. Because in the Burnout chapter, I'm talking about how I'm working, and I've always compulsively overworked. When I was in my 20s, I would like have a full-time job, and I'd have I was teaching adjunct art appreciation at night at the community college, or I was teaching, like I was teaching elementary during the day and community college at night, or I was working full-time as an online teacher and then also building my business at night. And so, I always had like 2 jobs at a time. When I did grad school, I did like a program where you took like twice the amount of courses that you usually take when you're in grad school. And so I'm just used to compulsively overworking, until I learned in my burnout that I was doing this to avoid feeling things. That if I slowed down, if I stopped, I would feel the feelings. And just like the shark, she understands what it means to never be able to stop moving, lest you find yourself unable to breathe. If I stopped working, if I stopped constantly keeping busy, the feelings would rise up, the panic would rise up, the anxiety would rise up. And working nonstop kept those feelings down. But they started showing in other ways. They started with my skin hurting and itching, chronic migraines. I had this weird scabs all over my legs at one point that like no doctor could figure out what it was. I went to all these doctors and they had diagnosed me with all sorts of things. Nothing ever worked to make it go away until I was like, I'm making this up. I was like, this isn't real. And then it went away. So it was like your body, like if you keep your emotions in, if you hold them in, they will find their way out. And I had a tremor, like I had all sorts of things that popped up because my body couldn't take it anymore. It couldn't take the constant working, and all those feelings were just bottled up, and they were ready to explode. And so I had to work with a coach. And I had the great privilege to work with my very first coach. That's what we worked on was, okay, slowing down, feeling my feelings. And then, like I talked about in one of the other episodes, I don't remember which one, is like, stop listening to all of the other people and learn to listen to myself. And that's what that chapter was about. And in my book too, I have quotes that kind of pull out that, every single one of them came from a book I was reading while I was writing the book. And because I have a Kindle and I highlight things and then it syncs it to Goodreads, and then I can go and read all my quotes from all the books. And it's one of my favorite things to do is go and read the things I highlighted. So I added that line to the book. And then I was like, wait, I better check to see if this is true. Do sharks have to move to breathe? Make sure that's true. And it was, because I started talking all about sharks. I wrote the chapter, but then I was like, sharks, talking all about sharks. And then I was like, why am I talking about sharks? And then suddenly I was like, wait, what if the artwork is about sharks? And then I was Googling shark art, which is hilarious because when I first started my blog, Art Class Curator, on the blog, I had a Shark Week post. It had a bunch of shark artworks on it, which was awesome. I always loved Shark Week back when I had cable. But I found in the looking of the shark art, the painting from the Jaws poster. And you probably know exactly what I mean. It's that Jaws shark, great white shark coming up from the bottom, that triangular head and the big mouth full of teeth in the water. And then you've got the swimmer at the top of the surface, and she's naked, she's swimming, and she's about to get bitten by or eaten by that shark. And I was like, this is the artwork. And it was like everything fell into place. And so if my brain, my subconscious wasn't constantly working, constantly thinking, constantly making connections, they wouldn't have led me down this path. And also, you have to be listening. You have to be aware. It's not about just when you're writing, and when you're doing something else, you're doing something else. It's you're always working on it. You're always thinking about it. It's always there, whether you know it or not. You're looking for connections. You're trying to solve the creative problem. So when you're deep in a creative project, your whole existence is related to that. And it's similar to like a business. And I think I view business as a creative endeavor. Like when I do business coaching, most of the time it's not about business. It's about something in your life, but they're all connected. It's all related. Everything connects to everything else. And that's what happened in this process. So I start writing about the Jaws poster, and the metaphors was, oh God, the metaphors. I just absolutely died with this. I mean, like, it was my favorite thing to write in that book because the metaphor was so rich and layered. It was like, okay, the swimmer, she's swimming. She's probably super happy. She's feeling a little risky because she doesn't have her clothes on. She's got the endorphins from the exercise, and she's got the, vitamin D and the things from the being out in the sun, and like that just delicious feeling of like swimming in the ocean. And then you start to think like, what would happen if she stopped swimming, and the danger of stillness, and if she started kind of floating down like that shark was ready to get her. And it was exactly the language that chapter needed. And then I'm writing. It's one of those times where I'm just like, lots of words getting written in one day. And that's not very normal for me, like for that many words to get written in a day. But I was talking about the shore, and I was talking about lighthouses, and I was talking about waves. And, it was like ocean metaphors and shark metaphors. And I mean, it was Oh God, it was so exciting, y'all. You don't even know how exciting it was. I wonder if I should read you a little bit. Let me see. I got the book here. I'm not going to read a lot, like the whole chapter. That's a whole thing. But oh, I done the music. I brought in the music of, dun dun that. Like that came in and it was so exciting. Okay, so I'm going to read you like a couple different passages from the book. Okay, here we go. This is page 85. At some level, I understood that feeling any discomfort would stop me mid-stroke. So I did everything I could to push these emotions down through distraction and repression. I can see this now, but if you had asked me then, I would have told you that I was the happiest I have ever been during those early years of my business. And I was immensely happy. I had arrived at a great place, the top of the proverbial stairs. I was traveling again. I attended conferences nationwide, met interesting people, traveled to Europe multiple times, and even spent a week in Japan with my sister during cherry blossom season. I had a beautiful business making a real difference in the world. I had beautiful children, hilarious friends, and a devoted husband who loved me dearly. We finally had a stable income with enough money to meet our basic needs with a little room to play. I was living that full, vital life of my dreams. But an undercurrent of anxiety was simmering underneath my policy of just keep swimming. Something was lurking beneath the surface that I was avoiding. Here comes the shark. The iconic artwork from the Jaws movie poster, an original painting by Roger Kastel, shows my undercurrent perfectly. In the painting, a nude woman, the great white's first victim in the movie, Chrissy Watkins, swims at the ocean surface. Her eyes are closed. She is blissfully unaware of what lurks below. Under her, in the dense blue water, a giant great white shark, Bruce, of course, swims up with his mouth open, full of gangly, sharp, chaotic, and absolutely terrifying teeth. His open mouth is as wide as Chrissy is tall. He is waiting to gulp her up in one decisive bite. We know it's coming, but Chrissy doesn't. She isn't aware of the danger lurking. She can't see through the darkness of the sea or hear it through her pounding heart and increased blood flow. The ocean waves crashing in the distance and her freestyle strokes splashing by her ears. She probably feels free, happy, invigorated, and maybe even at peace. The water sliding past her nude skin, the endorphins rushing through her body, dopamine sending waves of pleasure, and adrenaline pumping through her bloodstream and creating excitement with the rebelliousness of her risque actions. Her nervous system was doing all the right things to give her a satisfying, robust experience of her human vitality. Starting a business based on my passion, skills, and drive, and stepping out of the societal expectation of the 9 to 5 was my version of skinny dipping. In the beginning, when my business was just me and my whims and energy, I could learn, experiment, and play. The creation process of the business, building the brand, doing the tech, making the products, writing the content, each of those things probably released the same hormones that flooded through the soon to be eaten swimmer. My ADHD brain craved feel-good brain chemicals, and my business provided that dopamine left and right. The cha-ching of a new sale, the satisfaction of solving a problem, a beautiful comment saying how my work impacted people, sending an email to thousands of people or posting something personal on social media, especially with all of the social baggage from my past, felt scary and risky. So my body would flood with adrenaline at doing something so vulnerable. And for a while, I loved every minute of it. I'm going to skip ahead just a little. I had a crystal clear vision of where this business could take me. And I had 100% trust that if I just kept working, the results I wanted would come. Never before had I had such trust in anything, let alone myself. But what would happen to Chrissy if she were to keep swimming and swimming and swimming? Okay, one, she will definitely get eaten by that shark, but I'll get to Bruce later. Physically, depending on her fitness level, she will start feeling the effects of the constant movement. Her muscles are going to begin to tire. She might start to get cramps. Her speed will decrease as the power in her muscles wears out. Her lung capacity will diminish, and her heart will reach its maximum capacity. The adrenaline that's giving her that excited rush will also take a toll on her body. The other side of adrenaline is anxiety. Excitement and anxiety can feel exactly the same sometimes. Adrenaline, the hormone epinephrine, breaks down sugars in her liver to boost some quick energy. It's there to support her during stressful times, making her more focused and ready to respond to dangers, distracting her from any discomfort her body feels so that she can push through the pain to escape this dangerous situation. However, existing too long and often in this stress state can negatively affect our system. It can lead to heart damage, headaches, high blood pressure, and inability to sleep, which will then cause its own problems and anxiety. So Dory's mantra of just keep swimming from Finding Nemo may work for a fish built for constant swimming. But if Chrissy were to just keep swimming forever, some bad things would start to happen, even without Bruce waiting to gulp her up. And that's what started happening to me. So then I talk about like the physical things I already mentioned, and I'm going to go to the end. So then I'm talking about how like I stopped looking at art, all this stuff. And I'm going to read the last part of the chapter because it's really fun too. Okay. Faintly in the background, I could hear it though. The opening to the Jaws theme music by John Williams. Dun, 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 dun. You can too, right? The composition starts with just piano, then a drum, followed by blasts of horns, and then more instruments, strings, and woodwinds slowly coming in, increasing the tension, the danger, and the chaos. And this is kind of hard to read aloud, but it bear with me here. But it says, it has like the lyrics of the Duns. So done, me working way too many hours and ignoring my physical and emotional needs. Done. Me overscheduling myself and not giving myself space to be and breathe. Dun, dun. Me listening to others telling me how to run my business instead of listening to my inner voice. Dun, dun. Me stopping writing. Dun, 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 dun. Me stopping looking at art. Dun, dun, dun. Me pushing down the anxiety all of this brings up. Dun, dun, dun. Me knowing something is wrong but ignoring it. Dun, dun, dun. My skin is inflamed and itchy and my head aches daily. Dun, dun, dun. As I pushed and worked towards the goals that online business world told me I should have and leaned into my role as a quote unquote responsible business owner instead of a quote unquote passionate creative, I fervently swam further and further from the shores of my own well-being, from the sands of my own connection to myself, and from the lighthouse that is my deep connection to art, ignoring the waves of intuition attempting to bring me back to safety, back to myself. At this point, there was only one thing left to do. Chrissy stopped swimming and Bruce got his next meal. That is the end of part 1. It was the most exciting writing I've ever done. And even reading it aloud just now just made me so happy in the memory of writing it, because it was just such a magical like thing, not knowing, reading the line in the book, getting curious about sharks, adding the sharks to the book, finding the Jaws poster, finding all the metaphors. Like, it was so cool. And that is what's true about the creative process. And that is what's true about life, is that you don't get clarity by pushing through. You get clarity by staying with the mystery. Just like I said last week, the fog is not the problem, it's the portal. And the magic only comes if you're willing to walk through it without knowing where it leads. That shark metaphor, that painting entering the book, that joy of getting to write that perfect metaphor, it didn't come from overthinking. It didn't come from logic. It came from letting go. It came from surrender. And we can white knuckle and grip so tightly to so many things in our lives. But if we just let go and we trust ourselves, some really amazing magic can happen. And as long as you are showing up, so I could have gotten stuck and stopped working. But I kept working. I kept showing up day to day. I went to a writing group every day and I just kept working on it. And I worked on other parts. I worked on the parts that didn't need the art. And when you're showing up consistently to your work, to yourself, even your rest time, even your playtime, even your sleep time, feed the project. And there's a famous Picasso quote that says, inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. So as long as you're doing the work, that inspiration will happen. I read that book, Remarkably Bright Creatures, for a reason. It found me for a reason. At that moment in time, some universal being, spirit, whatever it is, put that book in my hand, The Magic of Art. And it found me because I was ready for it and I needed it at that moment. Because your creative mind is always watching, it's always listening, it's always pulling all of the threads together. And sometimes the universe is too. And those are the moments that make the creative process so exciting, because it's hard. Writing a book, not easy. There's so many people that are like, I'd love to write a book one day. And I even, for several years before I actually really started writing, would start and stop and start and stop and start and stop. But it's all about starting and keeping working and not giving up. Because for every hard part, for every like messy middle muck that you're in the creative process, those breakthroughs are so magical, so joyful. It makes the process so exciting. I can't wait to write another book. I kind of think I have the idea, but it just makes the process so rewarding when you get to have those moments. And I remember going back after I finished my first draft, when I finished every single chapter and I was going back to the beginning, there were parts that I read and I was like, there's no way I wrote that. I was like, that's too good. And I'd be like, surely my editor came in and like did it when I wasn't looking. And so I'd go back in the Google Doc things and I was like, no, she didn't make any changes. She only makes changes as track changes or whatever. So like I can accept or reject. And I was like, I wrote that. Like those are my words that I wrote. And it was so exciting. I'm so proud. And like I love my book. But so much of it is actually like when I hold that book, it's like a memento. It's like a souvenir of the time I spent writing it. Like the time was so joyful and so amazing. So I want to challenge you, if you're in the fog, if you're stuck, if you're unsure what your next step is just stay close, keep working, stay open, keep listening, because your shark will surface. Some quote will land, the perfect book will fall into your lap, but only if you've made space for it to arrive. So that version of me that was working constantly, she couldn't have written a book because she didn't have the space to really do the mental and emotional processing that's needed to write a book. You have to make the space in your life. You have to give yourself rest. You have to give yourself time. I played so much Minecraft while I wrote my book because I could just do this sort of mindless task while my brain was working. So if you haven't started your project, start your project. You don't have to know where it's going to end up, but the magic will come when you begin and because you began. So it's time for you to do it. And as a reminder, I do help people with this, whether it's a book, whether it's an art project, whether it's an exhibit, whether it's a musical, like whatever it is, whether it's a business, the creative process is pretty much universal across all of those things. And it's about working through those times when you get stuck, working through those times where you feel like you're an imposter, working through the times when you're stuck in perfectionism, working through the times where you want to give up because you're like, why am I even doing this? This is stupid. And working through the life shit that happens when you're writing a book, because like I said, the universe would throw things at me to prove that what I was writing about was true. And I kind of had to relive my whole life, since it's a memoir. So I relive all the pain and relive everything so that I could articulated on the page. So I hope that really illustrated like a specific example of the magic of the creative process. I hope that if you have a big project in you, that you are ready to start, even if you're scared. Do it messy, do it scared, and just keep going and get support. I don't think I could have done it without my writing group or without the coaching that I got. And like I said earlier, spoiler alert, I have a program coming up in September, which will have both a co-working component and a coaching component. And I also do one-on-one coaching. So keep an eye out for that program. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching, reach out and we can schedule a call to see if we're a good fit for each other. And I love creativity. I love creation, and I love helping people unearth the magic that's in them and the magic that surrounds them in the art that they engage in. So it's fun to reminisce about that experience, because that was one of my most magical and favorite experiences of writing my book. So, all right, I will see you next week for another episode of Wrecked by Art, where we will talk about art that impacts us. If you have a story of art impacting you, it can be a musical, it can be a book, it can be whatever it is, a work of art. And if it changed you, if it made you see your life differently, if whatever it did for you, I would love to hear your story and perhaps have you on the podcast to share. So reach out to me at Cindy at artandself.com, and we can talk about it. You can follow me on TikTok and on Threads. Those are my two favorite social medias. You can subscribe to the podcast on Substack or any of your favorite podcast players. So please click subscribe if this is your first episode, and I will see you next week. Bye.